All right, Lone Star Gunners, welcome to the podcast. This is Derek Wills, your humble host of Lone Star Gun Talk, the official podcast of Lone Star Gun Rights. Go ahead and chime in on the, already right out of the gate, Eric says every single gun law is an infringement. I absolutely agree. Charles, hello, how are you? We also got Paul and Susan in here. Awesome. Wayne, Tara, man, everybody's fired up today. I love it. I am fired up as well. We are going to get into all sorts of stuff today. I know that we're starting this live stream just a wee bit early, just because of the fact that I think this one's going to go a bit long. So we're going to talk Dan Crenshaw. We're going to talk about Donald Trump briefly. I don't see the need to really get into that too terribly deeply because it's nothing that's really new news because he's been touting gun control for, well, I guess ever since he got elected, whenever he started with the Fix Nix Act, and then, comments are just rolling in. It's not a debate, it's a right. Sellout. Oh my God. Yes. All right, cool. I am really glad that y'all are fired up today. This is going to be a good show. I feel it in my bones. Definitely going to be way better than last week after I took a month off and was just struggling to get through and had probably the driest show known to man reading legal briefs. I don't know what I was thinking with that. That was a mistake. So hopefully this is going to be an exponentially better show today. Okay, so where should we start? We're covering a couple of things besides Dan Crenshaw. We're also, if anybody's familiar with the H3 podcast, they are a very, very popular podcast. They are based in California. They talk everything from politics to really anything. And they had Andrew Yang on their show this past week, and Andrew Yang is running for president under the Democratic ticket. He's one of the 1,232 members of the Democratic Party running for president in 2020. And so, he was on their show, and mainly he was there talking about universal basic income and how he wants to give every American $1,000 per month for life. But he goes into gun control, and that's where our topic of our focus is going to be, is what he said about gun control. So we have we need to talk about, we're going to start off with Dan Crenshaw. If you did not see it, this was a tweet that Dan Crenshaw had sent following El Paso and Ohio, I forget which city, Dayton, I think it was in Dayton. He says, the solutions aren't obvious, even if we pretend they are, but we must try. Let's start with the TAPS Act. Maybe also implement state red flag laws, or as we're calling them, Redcoat laws, or gun violence restraining orders. Stop them before they can hurt somebody. He got a lot of flack for that. A lot of flack, and rightfully so, because, well, first of all, calling for red flag laws at the state level is disgusting. Red flag laws have already resulted in at least one innocent person being killed by law enforcement because he refused to turn in his firearms when they showed up at his door and said, hey, we're here to take your guns even though you haven't done anything to warrant such a seizure. We don't have a warrant. We were just told that you might be a threat. And so they ended up making him a threat and injected him with lead until he passed away. That is at least one instance that we know of. There's no telling how many more those there have been, because, well, the media fallout from that story was awful. So, well, the media's got to spin the narrative. So they're probably going to say it was some drug dealer or something like that from now on. I'm really not into a lot of conspiracies, at all. But whenever it comes to the media definitely plays favorites and spins things to get ratings. Because that's that's how they make their revenue. So let's take a look first at the TAPS Act. What is the TAPS Act? I mean, Dan Crenshaw linked it. It must be okay, right? Well, it was authored by U.S. Congressman Brian Babin of the 36th District of the wonderful state of Texas. And, well, if a Texas Republican is the one that's, well, I guess, writing this, then that's got to be great, right? H.R. 838, the Threat Assessment Prevention and Safety Act. Oh, with a name like that, it has to be great. It's got threat assessment, we're preventing threats, and it's about safety. So it's got to be just wonderful. It's not gun control. It's safety, guys, okay? It's safety. It's not gun control. Well, let's see what this act actually does. This is the one-page summary of the TAPS Act, and I'm going to bring up the actual bill too. We're going to kind of go over it just a little bit because there are some things in this bill that are absolutely atrocious. Checking in on the comments here, and Paul says that they're talking about body armor now. Of course, because why not? Better stock up on your AR-500 body armor. I recommend at least a level 3 personally, but to each their own. If you want to do level 4, by all means, do that. And AR-500 also makes a level 3 plus in case you're interested. So let's get back to this. This is the one-page brief of the TAPS Act, and it's very vague if you notice. So let's get down to the nuts and bolts. Contents of the National Strategy Recommendation. So it establishes a joint behavioral threat assessment and management task force. We're task forcing this away, all right? We're going to task force away evil, and this is how we're going to do it. This is what they need to come up with. They need to develop and implement a national strategy for preventing targeted violence through behavioral threat assessment, and it must include, but it's not, it must include, but it's not limited to, so they can go beyond this scope, the most effective utilization of existing infrastructure and workforce, a behavioral threat assessment management unit support program. So I guess if the federal government is going to help the state governments, right? Training, because, the state government's going to establish their own behavioral threat assessment, I guess, task force, right? And the federal government's entity is going to train them on how to do that. School violence prevention program. So we're going to have the federal government teaching the state governments how to prevent threats at public schools. Okay. And a mental health service professional assessment to ensure mental health service professionals are equipped to collaborate, advise, and consult in the behavioral threat assessment and management process? What? Okay. Well, I don't know about y'all, but this is already sounding bad. And this isn't even the actual bill. This is the one-page summary of the bill of each individual section, right? Is this red flag? It doesn't say. That's the thing. It doesn't specifically talk about extreme risk protection orders. It doesn't talk about seizures or ex parte hearings or what have you. It talks about establishing a task force for assessing behaviors of individuals. This sounds worse than a red flag. I mean, this is the government evaluating you as an individual and then making an assessment from there. Red flag, to be in the awkward position of having to defend a red flag law. Red flag at least requires somebody to report that, to report you as a threat for whatever reason. This is the government doing it. This is worse than red flag. So what else does this do? And this is probably the worst part of this whole bill. Behavioral Threat Assessment and Management Grant Program establishes a grant that will be awarded to aid in the implementation, operation, and support, which means that when California comes up with their own threat assessment and management program, your tax dollars as a Texan, as a Louisianan, as an Oklahoman, or as a New Yorker, or wherever you might live, your tax dollars that are going to the federal government are then going to go to California to help them implement this program. And then it's going to do that for every state that implements it, that meets their certain requirements. So this is just a bribery scheme. The federal government is taking your tax dollars, our tax dollars, and then spreading them out and bribing states to implement these programs. Well, why wouldn't they? Oh, free money from the federal government that I don't have to worry about really paying for any of it or the bulk of it? Oh, well, sure, sign me up. I like money. Let's do this. Oh, wow. So here's the actual bill. And there are a couple of things that I want to highlight. This is H.R. 838, may be cited as the Threat Assessment, Prevention, and Safety Act of 2019. And we're going to go down to page 14 here. I probably should have gone down beforehand, so that way you're not. So here's the contents of the National Strategy recommendations. And it says it shall include each of the following: existing infrastructure plans, unit support program, a training program, and check this out. Recommendations relating to a behavioral threat assessment and management training program, which may train officers and employees of federal, state, local, and tribal government agencies and private entities. So this is not only governmental, but the federal government is going to be bribing private entities in order to implement these programs. That's scary. In community-based, multidisciplinary, and multi-jurisdictional behavioral threat assessment and management. Here's the school violence prevention program that I mentioned, as well as the mental health service professional assessment. Recommendations relating to the involvement of a mental health service professional to collaborate, advise, and consult in a behavioral threat assessment process as permitted under the applicable federal and state laws. So the federal government is establishing guidelines on how mental health service professionals will be forced to collaborate, advise, and consult the government on an individual. This sounds like it's a violation of HIPAA laws already. Here comes Blackwater to take your stuff. I'm just kind of going through all of the comments here. Paul says he's going to report Beto. Beto says that he's a gun owner. I mean, he might be, but Beto's not going to be. He won't even get looked at. So, that's just silliness right there, Paul. He's not a threat to anybody, I promise. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to highlight is on page 19, line 11. Okay, contracting services. This is under the section for implementation of the national strategy. The secretary shall enter into contracts with public agencies or private entities. There's private entities again, with expertise in behavioral threat assessment and management to assist with the implementation of the national strategy. So you're going to have the state strategies, right? And then you're going to have the national strategy, and we're going to bring in a bunch of private entities to consult with what makes somebody a threat, just based off of their behavior. They're going to create a website, which is great. And then finally, page 21. This is where things get really bad. Behavioral Threat and Assessment and Management Grant Program. Now, they are going to establish matching funds. An eligible entity that receives a grant under this subsection shall provide a cash contribution in amount that is not less than 10% of the amount of the grant. So basically, they're going to, the federal government is going to pay for 90% of these this plan, this national strategy, if you will. And here is an eligible entity defined. Again, something that is just red flag, pardon the pun. In this section, the term eligible entity means a state, a tribal organization, an educational entity, a unit of local government, or a non-governmental organization. So, yeah, let's fully support this, Mr. Dan Crenshaw. This sounds like a great bill. This sounds like it's full of absolute rainbows and unicorns. I cannot believe that he would. Well, let me retract that. I can believe this. This didn't surprise me at all. I know it surprised a lot of you, but I had some information before he got elected that led me to believe that he was going to go down this road eventually. But this. Susan asks, do we know who wrote or advised on the TAPS Act? Yes, Brian Babin of Texas House District 36, Congressional District. Brian Babin, a Republican of Texas, wrote this bill. This is something that is... This is atrocious, and this isn't even the red flag thing. So here's one thing that I want to explore too. If you didn't see this, I'm going to play this little snippet in its entirety because I want you to hear from Dan Crenshaw himself what he is saying, because he got so blasted by people for even mentioning red flag laws that he is feeling some political heat like he's never felt before. And I'm glad that people were responding that way. But the thing is, he's trying to spin it like, oh, this isn't gun control. This is good. This is good. We're protecting due process, right? I'm going to play this for you in its entirety. It's a few minutes long, but I want you to hear what he had to say. Check this out.
Wow, what a week. So earlier this week, President Trump indicated his support for something called red flag laws. I stated on Twitter that maybe we should consider them at the state level. Maybe we should have a conversation about it, and it should be a conversation. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. What came out of it instead was hate-filled comments, lots of emotion, a lot of anger, a lot of memes. A lot of memes, by the way, which could be improved. Okay, but that's not the point. The point is that clearly even the words red flag law just emotionally triggered a lot of people. It made you guys really mad at me. And it seemed that no amount of explanation was able to quell your fears or convince you otherwise, and convince you that somehow the president and I had not betrayed you. That is not true, of course, and it's sad that many of you think that. It really is. But I did have some good conversations, some good private conversations with a lot of you, and this is what I found out. Clearly, when we say red flag laws, you guys stop listening. You can't hear what we're suggesting, because understandably, you automatically assume that we are just agreeing with the left's version of that law, and we all know that the left's version would not be good. It would not protect due process. But as it turns out, that isn't what we're talking about at all. At its heart, what we're talking about is the ability to confiscate weapons when there is clear evidence that violence is about to be committed. It's that simple, and this isn't that controversial. What is controversial is how that due process is protected, and I think that's where a lot of these concerns are. Making sure that due process could not be abused is at the heart of any conservative solution to the supposed red flag laws and our version of what those would look like. I have laid out specific safeguards that would have to be in place for us to support any type of red flag law. Okay, among them would be clear and convincing evidence, punishment for false accusations, right to attorney and cross-examination, and limited standing so that not just anybody can accuse you. For instance, not just a neighbor, not just an ex. It has to be somebody with standing, maybe a family member, or maybe only police officers. We've got a great study by Cato Institute that lays this out exactly. Here's the thing. I understand your fears about bad red flag laws. Red flag law is a general concept. There can be good ones and there can be bad ones. You should be against the bad ones, as I am. The whole purpose of what the president did and what I am doing in trying to start a conversation about this is so that we take control of the narrative and propose solutions that actually do protect due process rights and ensure that we aren't on the sidelines when Democrats are proposing blatantly unconstitutional laws that would not protect due process. The last thing is this. No one is saying this is definitely the solution. It's a conversation. I haven't come out in support of any particular bill or state law. It's a conversation that conservatives have actually been having for a very long time. It's not new at all. And it definitely does not deserve the emotional reaction it has gotten. We are better than that. Let's be better than that.
We're better than that, y'all. We should be better than that. What a condescending thing to say. Okay. So he said some things in here. First of all, he is an outright liar. He said that he has not come out in support of any particular bill. Really? Because I'm pretty sure that you sent this tweet here that says that you support, or that we should try, this tweet right here. Let's start with the TAPS Act. Maybe implement state red flag laws. That is in support of a specific bill, and then possible support for other bills at the state level. So Dan Crenshaw, I'm sorry, but you're a freaking liar. You said that you didn't come out in support of any law, specific bill. Yes, you did. So don't try and spin this in a way that makes you look good. And then you said something, you slyly went through and you said some things that most people, and it's not their fault, but most people would not know the specifics about what you meant. You said that your proposals, the ones that you would support, one would require somebody with standing, so not just a rando person, maybe a family member, right? Because family members would never, ever, in this country of 327 million people, would never, ever try and screw over another family member. Got it. But you said something very specific. You said that it would require clear and convincing evidence. Now, to the average person, that sounds like, okay, yeah, that sounds like something that you would find in a criminal court. It's not. Clear and convincing evidence is a very specific legal phrase. If you've listened to this show for a period of time, I have gone into this before, but in case you're new, there are 3 burdens of proof in any court case. This goes for civil and criminal. The first phrase that is used is a preponderance of evidence. So in a preponderance of evidence, again, it sounds pretty good, but a preponderance of evidence, the ruling is based entirely on whether or not the evidence suggests that it was more likely than it happened than it didn't. So basically, there is a 51% chance that what the person is being accused of did what they were being accused of. There's a 51% chance. So in most civil cases, a preponderance of evidence is what's required. This is why you don't need a unanimous ruling from a jury in a civil case to find that a defendant was at fault. You only need a majority, because the majority of the jurors said, yeah, I think that this is more likely that it happened than didn't. This is also the typical burden of proof whenever it comes to asset forfeiture laws, as well as any ex parte hearing for most red flag laws. And then there's a second version. Well, actually, let's go to the other extreme, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. This is the one that everybody seems to know. You must be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this person committed this crime. This is the burden of proof that is required whenever it comes to criminal cases. Any and all criminal cases requires a burden of proof that is beyond a reasonable doubt. This means there is a 99% likelihood that the person being accused of committing that crime committed that crime, because you can never have a full 100%, right? Then you have the middle, which is clear and convincing evidence. This means that it is a burden of proof that is in between a preponderance of evidence and beyond a reasonable doubt. I have seen a couple of red flag bills that have been written, including the one that was filed here in Texas, that did say clear and convincing evidence. But clear and convincing evidence is not beyond a reasonable doubt. There is still roughly a 25% likelihood that the person being accused of what they're being accused of is being falsely accused of whatever they're being accused of. So the fact that he said those words, clear and convincing evidence, should be a red flag to anybody. Anytime you hear the words preponderance of evidence or clear and convincing evidence, do not fall for them at face value. They are very specific legal phrases that have very specific meanings whenever it comes to case law. So that is a tip of his hand, because as Paul points out, a political speechwriter wrote that, and he's probably right, because Dan is facing a lot of heat for this. So he probably got smacked around a bit on. Well, I know that he got smacked around a bit on social media because of this. And then there is one other point that I want to bring up. I seem to be having some issues with the live stream here. Hang on just one sec. Everything seems to be good, but there's one other thing. Hopefully you guys can catch up whenever it comes back in. One thing that he brings up is that we're talking about seizing weapons whenever there's a threat. There is already laws against conspiracy. Okay, if you are conspiring, if you are planning an attack, you're planning a robbery, you're planning a heist, you don't actually have to commit those heists in order to be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal court of law that would send you to prison on a conspiracy charge. The state of Texas has conspiracy laws. The federal government has conspiracy laws. You don't actually have to commit an act in order to be thrown in prison for conspiring to commit that act. If somebody is too dangerous to be left out in society with their firearms, then why in the hell are they in society? If somebody is planning an attack to shoot up a Walmart, to shoot up a mall, to shoot up a school, or whatever, if somebody is planning that and you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this person is planning to execute people, to blow up a building, or what have you, why in the hell are you not charging them and convicting them of conspiracy to do so and throw their ass in prison? But no. We have to go through and have this conversation where we say, oh, this person might do something, so instead of charging them with conspiracy, we're just going to take their guns. You honestly think that somebody that was planning on doing something is all of a sudden just not going to because the government came and took their guns? No, it's far more likely that what's going to happen is innocent people are going to get flagged under these Redcoat laws, and they're going to have their firearms taken away from them, and they have never once committed a crime. I am tired of these Republicans coming through and saying, yeah, gun control, it's okay because we're doing it. It's not a big deal. Gun control's okay when Republicans do it. And I'm tired of people making excuses for them. You know what? You should listen to Dan Crenshaw and what he had to say, how he's explaining it. It makes perfect sense. No, it does not. This is dangerous. This is how we ended up in the current place that we're at. This is how we ended up with the National Firearms Act, the Federal Firearms Act of 1938, the Gun Control Act of 1968, the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986, the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988, the Gun-Free School Zones Act of 1990, and the frickin' Assault Weapons Ban of 1993. And this is how we end up with bump stock bans. And this is how we end up with suppressors going away. And this is how we end up where the only gun that you have the right to frickin' own is a single-shot Derringer. I am tired of these politicians, and I am tired of these limp-wristed organizations providing cover for Republicans who sell out our natural rights. And I am certainly tired of Democrats, well, because they're Democrats, but at least they're frickin' honest about what they want to do for the most part. We'll get to Andrew Yang here in a minute, but he's, bloviating as well as he does. But yeah, they're all sellouts. They are, as Sterling says, they are sellouts. And you know what? I'm going to take that back. I don't think they're sellouts. I think that this is something that they just don't care about, which is why they're so quick to be like, yeah, sure, sounds like a good idea. And this is how we end up with problems like this. This is how we end up with, I forgot about the Brady Bill, the Brady Act of 93. Yeah, I forgot about that. Because that's worked great, right? Background check. This is another thing that really chaps my ass. Because, and I'm sorry for the language, guys. I'm trying to keep this rant profanity free. And I know that ass isn't a horrible word, but I'm really trying here, guys. One thing that really upsets me is when people say that they support background checks. Background checks don't do anything. They say, oh, I don't think felons should have a gun. Okay, sounds good on paper, but have you given that any thought? Did you know that there's a great book out there that says that's entitled 3 Felonies a Day that highlights how the average American commits 3 felonies a day and doesn't even know it? Because the laws are written so vaguely that you could indict anybody. The expression is real. You could indict a ham sandwich. And then whenever you find yourself being indicted for a felony charge that you didn't even know was illegal because of how vaguely worded the law is written and it's now applied to you, then next thing you know, you're a felon. Okay, well, just violent felon, somebody who if they've killed somebody or they've robbed somebody, they just shouldn't have their guns. Okay, why are they released if they're too dangerous to be released? Why is somebody that made a major mistake in their past, let's say they're 18 years old running with the wrong crowd, they hold up a stop and rob, and then they get busted. They do 20 years, and they really realize, you know what? I want to turn my life around. I want to make an honest living. I want to contribute to society. I want to do X, Y, and Z. Well, now they are forbidden from possessing the tools necessary to defend their life, liberty, and property. I'm sorry, I thought that bearing arms was a natural God-given right. If that's the case, then the government doesn't have the authority to say who can and can't exercise it. Either gun ownership is a natural right given to us by God, or it's a governmental privilege that was given to us by government on the condition that we act a certain way. Which is it? You can't have both. Because if it's a natural right, if it is a God-given right, then only nature, only God has the authority to take that away from anybody. So how do you determine which one it is? How do you determine whether it's a God-given right or a government-given privilege? Well, here's the litmus test. Is your life right now, are you alive because of the fact that the government says you can be alive? Or is that something that is inherent to you as being a human being? Did God say you have the right to be alive? Does nature put forth this right as you have the right to be alive? I don't care who says otherwise. If that answer is government, then I have no idea what to say to you. But if that answer is God, if that answer is nature, whatever your belief system is, then okay, how do you defend yourself? How do you defend your life? How do you defend your liberty and your property if you're limited by in the tools that you determine to be necessary to adequately and effectively defend them. Well, if you have the right to life, but you only have the right to a hunting knife as a means of defending it, then I'm sorry, the government has sentenced you to death. They have taken your right to life away because they have taken your right to defend the tools that would be necessary to adequately defend your life against any threat that you could possibly imagine. Well, since the most substantial threat that I could ever possibly imagine is the United States government turning tyrannical and going door to door to kick down doors and seize weapons, well, then I have the right, the natural right, to meet them with equal force. Should that happen? The likelihood of that happening, well, it's going up. It's still pretty slim at this point, but it doesn't matter. Natural rights aren't contingent upon the likelihood that you'll need to exercise it in that particular way. It's how I determine the threat to be. It's how I feel it is necessary to defend my life. It's how you feel is necessary to defend your life. And the same applies to the license to carry. Oh, you can't defend your life outside your own property unless you get a permission slip. Right. You want to hear something? This is a little personal matter that y'all might find interesting. My wife does not have an LTC. And she found on the internet 2 days ago that somebody found a Post-it note where they're building the new Ranger Stadium that said, if you thought El Paso was bad, wait until this Saturday, 8/10. My wife was freaked the hell out about that. And she was going shopping out in Dallas. And she was telling me how uneasy she felt. And I said, do you want to take one of my guns? Knowing that she doesn't have an LTC, but I thought, I would much rather her have the means of protecting herself than follow the law. Given how her anxiety was flaring up. And she said no. Because that would make her more anxious because now she's wondering if law enforcement is going to come and arrest her for carrying a weapon for self-freaking defense outside of the home. All right, so I'm going to end that rant right there. And now I'm going to transition a bit. I'm sorry that I went long on the preaching. Well, not really, because that's what makes this show fun. But I'm going to go and I'm going to talk about the H3 podcast and Andrew Yang. For those of you who don't know, the H3 podcast is a very, very popular podcast. They upload to YouTube and every other platform that you can imagine. They have millions of subscribers. They make a boat ton of money, and they're very popular. They had Andrew Yang on, and he wanted to talk about gun control. So there are two clips in particular that I want to play. And I'm going to address each clip individually. I'm going to play the first clip first, and then we'll go through it really quickly. Again, it's a bit long, so kind of bear with us. It's not dead air, so, there's that. But here is Andrew Yang and the host of H3 talking about gun control. Check this out.
I want to ask you, first of all, why do you think all these mass shootings are happening to begin with?
To me, it's such a multifaceted problem from top to bottom. And so the things that we're focused on right now are in some ways the most immediate problems, which is our political rhetoric and climate has demonized and vilified people on the other side, then makes it seem like somehow violence might be appropriate in some circumstance. Certainly the fact that we have so many guns in this country, we're at almost 400 million firearms, almost one for every man, woman, and child. Wow. Now, that gun ownership is concentrated in the hands of a relatively small number of Americans. One of the stats I saw was that 3% of Americans own 50% of the guns. Wow. So that's like a lot of guns per person in that 3%. But 3% in a country our size is still 10 million Americans. You have the fact that the NRA is making it impossible to pass any reasonable gun safety laws, even though the vast majority of Americans support background checks and red flag laws and obvious safety measures. And then the deeper problems are around this loss of any kind of sense of purpose or like the direction, where unfortunately it makes people more subject to hateful ideologies that can spread much more virulently on the internet now than they could have even 12, 15 years ago.
They're finding communities that reinforce their beliefs.
Yeah, this internet pioneer named Jaron Lanier pointed out that negative ideas and sentiments spread much more powerfully on the internet than positive ones. And if you think about your own experience in social media, it's kind of true. It's like the toxic things like just sort of take on a life of their own. And so that's helping fuel this set of problems. So that there are problems up and down, and we have to try and attack each one in turn. But unfortunately, it's going to be with us for a long time because, again, we're talking about a country with 300 million plus firearms.
Yeah.
It's dark. I mean, even if we passed some of these gun safety laws, which we 100% should and will, we need to have a perpetual buyback in effect, in my opinion, where we just say, look, anytime you want to sell your gun, like we'll buy it off you like that, because we need to try and get the supply down over time.
Interesting. Why are people feeling so
So there was a lot to digest there, and obviously he is way out of left field. Sue says, I wonder how the 3% got their name. I will stand with the Threepers. You know, I will too. God bless you, Sue. Seriously. So there's a lot that he talked about there, and I want to kind of just go through a few of them point by point. He says that the NRA has never been, has made it impossible to have any real conversation about gun control and has never supported gun control, etc., except for the fact that the NRA has supported every single federal gun control law on the books currently. They supported the National Firearms Act. They supported the Gun Control Act. They supported the Federal Firearms Act. They supported the Undetectable Firearms Act, the FOPA, the Gun-Free School Zones Act. They initially opposed the Brady Handgun Violence Protection Act, which established the background check system. They initially opposed that, but then the Brady campaign and the NRA came together and they found a compromise, and so they ended up supporting it in the end. And now they're providing cover for Republicans because that's what they do. So that talking point, it just makes me laugh every time I hear a leftist talk about how the NRA is this evil organization and how they have never been one to compromise on gun rights, and that's literally all they've ever been good for. He talks about how the vast majority of Americans support red flag laws and background checks. And, you know, to be honest, I don't think that he's wrong in this. I think that his figure of 80 to 90% might be a little skewed, but I think that a majority of Americans do support these laws. The reason is because they're not invested in this. It's not going to affect them personally. At least they don't think that it will. They might be, many of them might be gun owners. The thing is, most people have lives to live where they cannot spend every waking moment rallying around a particular issue. They go to work, they come home, they take care of their kids and their wife or what have you, and they might turn on the news, at 10 o'clock and go to bed. And then rinse and repeat, because that's what they need to do. That they got to do what they got to do, and that's what they got to do. And so I'm not faulting people for being ignorant on this topic, but I think that the majority of Americans do support these laws because of the fact that they're ignorant about them, because they don't have anything invested in them. And that's something that we need to change. We need to control the dialogue. We need to control the narrative, and we need to tell people how dangerous these laws are, and two, how ineffective they are for their original intent. The intent is to bring down shootings, bring down homicides, but nothing has ever actually been a result of that. They don't work ever. And not to mention that homicide is an incredibly rare way to die in this country, but I digress. He highlighted how 3% of the population own 50% of the guns. And I have seen something similar to that. I'm not entirely... I don't have that statistic memorized. That could be true. I know I've heard something like that. And to be honest, that's great. But if you paid close attention to what he said, if you're listening to the replay of this, go back and re-listen to that little snippet. Listen to what he said very closely as it related to how many guns were owned. Because he talked about a perpetual buyback program. Because he said that he wanted to attack each problem, quote unquote, and it included how many guns there were. Well, the thing is, the 50% of guns that are owned by 3% of the population, they're not shooting anybody up. So how is that a problem? It's only a problem if you're a member of the government who doesn't like the private citizenry owning firearms. He tipped his hand whenever he said that, because he doesn't like the idea of private citizens owning firearms. Go back and listen to it again. Pay close attention. Listen to it 2 or 3 times. He talks about it. How he says that the problem, one of the problems is how many guns we have in civilian hands. He doesn't like that. It makes him feel uneasy. And he said that there needs to be a perpetual buyback to get the supply down. That makes him uncomfortable. An armed population makes him uncomfortable, which is exactly the frickin' reason why everyone should own a firearm or 5. Government should feel uncomfortable by an armed citizenry because that keeps them in check. That's how you preserve life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson, who is my spirit animal, has famously been quoted as saying, "The price of liberty is eternal vigilance." And that's kind of what he meant. Yeah, it takes a population to be informed on the subjects and understand what their government is doing as being part of that eternal vigilance. But the other part of that is you need to be able to be vigilant from a standpoint of putting it back in its place, should it need to be put back in its place. Hell, Thomas Jefferson said several times throughout his life that he thought that revolutions should happen regularly. He is famously quoted as saying that the Constitution should be thrown out every 19 years, every generation, because the population, the newer population, should not be subject to the same contract that the previous generation was put into, because they had no say in said contract. Now, it's important to note here that when he says the Constitution, he's not talking about the Bill of Rights. He's talking about the form of government. He was an adamant believer in natural rights. And like, to the point where he says natural rights are something where if the entire population were to tell an individual that they did not have the natural right to do that, he should ignore them. Okay? Thomas Jefferson was the man. And he essentially said that that we needed to have a revolution every now and again, or at minimum, reform the government from the ground up every 19 years. Could you imagine if we reformed the government every 19 years, had a purge of the government every generation? Oh, that'd be fantastic. I would be all over that. Now, there would be some aspects of it that would be a little bit scary because of the unknown factor, but that's a whole nother topic. All right, so I'm going to play this second clip of Andrew Yang. This happened later in the show. They start talking more about universal basic income and how rainbows and unicorns everything's going to be whenever they tax the hell out of the tech industry. If you want a good laugh, it's at least worth listening to. But anyway, check this clip out. This is the last gun control clip from that episode.
We were talking about gun control. We got off that really, really quickly somehow. But I did want to ask you this to circle back to that. it's a complicated issue. You say that most Americans want common sense gun laws. It does seem like a party issue where most conservatives, there's kind of this echo chamber of people who are saying, don't restrict us. The government wants to take all of our guns. I mean, there's propaganda. But how do you get around the Second Amendment? Like the wording of it specifically says, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Do you intended that the authors of that meant for there to be no restrictions on it at all? Because it does say shall not be infringed. So how do you interpret that line?
Well, to me, you have to think of the intent at the time. And at that moment, they could not foresee automatic weapons that could kill dozens of Americans in very, very short periods of time. For them, bear arms meant, a single shot, musket or rifle, to make sure that, like you can't be completely marginalized in your own town or in your own country. So I'm for adhering to the Second Amendment in the sense that there are many, many law-abiding, gun-owning Americans, and they have that right, and that right's going to continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's strong propaganda, because what you always see is people basically saying they want to take all of our guns away.
Yeah, that is the argument, and that to me is because if you look at the numbers, 80 to 90% of Americans on both sides of the aisle agree that we should have background checks for gun owners. They agree that we should not have people who are criminally violent or have some other red flag associated with their record be allowed to buy guns. Yeah. So the vast majority of Americans on both sides of the aisle, but you're right that there's a passionate subgroup. And it goes back to what I said before, 3% of Americans own 50% of guns.
Right.
I have a feeling that's a very passionate 3%.
Right. What I wonder, too, is when this was written, were citizens allowed to own cannons or other, weaponry of more massive destruction? Do you know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying.
And I don't know the answer to that.
And today, too, I mean, this is morphed in a particular way because if the purpose is to defend yourself against government incursion, I mean, at this point, like, our government owns things bigger than cannons.
Well, like, and any AK-47 or whatever you've got, I mean, the government, if they want, that's not going to make a difference.
Yeah. And so this is like to me, something that has strayed from the original intent of the framers.
Yeah. Okay.
So, talking about how there were only single-shot weapons? Huh. Anybody know what this is? This, if you just look at the top with the Google, put in the Google, puckle gun. The puckle gun was invented, I believe, in the 1660s. And it was typically a ship-mounted gun, but you could see that it was essentially the predecessor to the Gatling gun. And here's a drawing. Check this out. The date on this one is 1718. Okay, I was wrong on that. So 1718. Remind me again of what year was the United States of America founded? I forget. It was like 1776 or something like that. I think that came after 1718, right? I'm not good at math. So if it 1718, that came before 1776, I believe. So if you're listening to the audio only version, you should definitely put in the Google puckle gun. And then if you really want some pretty good reading material, and you want to you want to learn about something else that would be a little bit more substantial, well, then you should Google the Belton Flintlock. It was never actually constructed, but it was presented to Congress. They had working prototypes. And it was a flintlock that was invented by Joseph Belton at some time prior to 1777. I'm reading the Wikipedia because it's just a wonderful source of information. And, let's see. The musket design was offered by Belton to the newly formed Continental Congress in 1777? Belton wrote that the musket could fire 8 rounds with one loading? What? Okay, all right. There are no known surviving examples of Belton's musket. The only evidence of its existence is the correspondence between Belton and Congress. Belton described the musket as capable of firing up to, quote, 8 balls, one after another, in 8, 5, or 3 seconds of time at a distance of 25 to 30 yards. He also claimed to have a secret method of modifying this weapon to discharge, quote, 16 or 20 balls in 16, 10, or 5 seconds of time. Historian Harold L. Peterson argued that because it was described as having a predetermined number of shots and rate of fire, it may have worked with a single lock igniting a fused chain of charges stacked in a single barrel, packaged as a single large paper cartridge. This sounds like a frickin' Roman candle that fired musket balls. And it was presented to Congress in 1777 during the American Revolution, but they ultimately didn't end up buying it. Now, pop quiz, everybody. What year was the Second Amendment, the entire Bill of Rights, ratified? 1791. Doing some basic non-common core math, 1777 took place before 1791. So to sit there with a straight face and say that you think that the government had no concept of future weaponry means that you have no freaking clue about history. None. You want to talk something else? Here's some wonderful history for you. This is a great book I highly recommend everybody get. It's called A Patriot's History of the United States by Larry Schweikart and Michael Allen. I'm going to read a little excerpt for you, talking about the battles of Lexington and Concord. If you own this book, check it out. It starts on page 72. History lesson for everybody, because the host of H3, I forget his name, and if he happens to be listening to this, I apologize. But he said that he didn't know the answer, and I'm not trying to do this to be a smartass to him, because if he seems like he's actually a reasonable guy because he asks reasonable questions. He is, of the left's mindset, and just based off of what little bit I do know about him. But he seems like a rational person that can have rational conversation with people. Okay, to answer your question as to whether or not civilians could own cannons. Okay. While all able-bodied males from 16 to 60, including congressional ministers, came out for muster and drill, each militia company selected and paid additional money to a subgroup, 20 to 25% of its number, to, quote, hold themselves in readiness at a minute's warning, complete with arms and ammunition. That is to say, a good and sufficient firelock, bayonet, 30 rounds of powder and ball, pouch, and knapsack. About this, they were resolute. Citizens in Lexington taxed themselves a substantial amount, quote, for the purpose of mounting the cannon, ammunition, and for carriage and harness of burying the dead. It says the citizens in Lexington taxed themselves. That means they set aside money. Not that the government of the city of Lexington coerced their tax dollars to pay for this. They taxed themselves, meaning these militia groups came together, put all their money in a pot, and bought some frickin' cannons and cannonballs, and set aside money to ensure that whoever didn't live through the skirmish had a proper burial. Learn history. Read history. You can learn so much without saying stupid things that shows how stupid you actually are. It is so mind-numbing that these people get away with telling these lies. And they get away with it constantly. Now, as far as Dan Crenshaw and Donald Trump are concerned, Donald Trump tweeted out that he wants to expand background checks and he wants to throw it into an immigration reform bill, which is how I think it's actually going to happen. It's scary because we're going to try and fight like hell against it, but it's going to be a difficult battle for sure. And I think that's how he's going to do it. Keep in mind, Trump signed the Fix Nix bill into law. That was authored by John Cornyn and thrown into the omnibus bill in 2017, which Donald Trump signed. And what that did is it bribed states to dump records into the Nix system, regardless of their accuracy. There was absolutely no repercussions for inaccurate reporting. And if your name was on the list and you weren't supposed to be, you had 90 days. Or you filed something and they were supposed to take care of it in 90 days, but we know that never happens. So that was signed into law. Donald Trump banned bump stocks because reasons. He has said some things about suppressors. He doesn't like suppressors, so you could probably imagine a gun control bill that has suppressor language in it. Even though they're already a pain in the ass to even get. I own one. I got a couple of tax stamps. And you know what it's like to drop $1,000 on a suppressor that you can't take home for another 11 months until your ATF Form 4 comes back? I'm sure more than a few of y'all do. But yeah, it's painful. You've paid $1,000 or more for a suppressor that you can't enjoy for 3, 6, 9, 11, in my case, 11 months. 11 months for a gun muffler, for a safety device, because assassins use them. It makes it sound like a laser. It goes pew, pew, pew. That's what silencers do, because that's what Hollywood told me they do. Even though if you've ever actually used a suppressor, you know otherwise, and that you should probably still wear some hearing protection because it's going to still hurt. Sean, you answer this. Are you against voter ID? Are you asking me that if I'm against voter ID? If you are, no, I'm not against voter ID. Maybe I missed some context. There's a lot of comments going on. Man, 143 comments already today. Well, already. It's been over an hour. We've been talking about this for over an hour. Oh, there's one thing that I forgot to show you guys. And that is this. Going back to Dan Crenshaw and the TAPS Act. This bill has been filed. It is in Congress. It was referred to the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security on March 25th, 2019. So it's kind of been there for a bit. And if you look down here at co-sponsors, it says 114, 57 Democrats and 57 Republicans. I wonder if Dan Crenshaw is on this list. Let me just do this. CREN. Oh, look. Representative Dan Crenshaw, Republican, Texas House District 2. He signed on to this bill April 2nd is when he became a co-sponsor. This isn't new, fellas. This isn't new, ladies and gentlemen. Dan Crenshaw is, well, he doesn't value natural rights. That was another thing that I wanted to highlight for you guys. So, okay, so yeah, Sean, you said you are asking me. I am not against voter ID. Voter ID. See, here's the thing with voting. Voting is not a natural right. Voting is a right that is established dependent entirely upon your form of government that you have instituted. So if you take a look at the Vatican, they have 1,000 citizens and 0 people are allowed to vote because of the fact that they're a citizen. They have no say in who the Pope is. That is given to an elector board of cardinals and some other senior people in the Catholic Church. As far as voting in our country is concerned, it applies the same way. We established voting, and I think that the government should treat it as a right, because that's how our form of government works, except for the fact that because it's a governmental right, it was granted by the government, they can establish whatever criteria they want to make you as far as your qualifications are concerned. So voter ID, if they want to mandate that you have to have a government ID in order to vote, that's perfectly fine, in my opinion. I am not against voter ID. I'm not quite sure what prompted the question, but I hope I answered it. I think voter ID is fine. I think it should be implemented if we're going to have, especially if the right to vote is based on the fact that you are a citizen and that's the only criteria that's there, then absolutely, you should have to prove that you meet that criteria. Now, on a personal level, and I'm not going to speak as, for Lone Star Gun Rights on this, this is my personal opinion, I think universal suffrage rights have been one of the most detrimental things to liberty that this country has ever put into place. I think that, personally, in order to be eligible to vote, you must own, not finance, own property, which would exclude me, because I don't own my house. So until you owned property outright, deed in hand, I think that should be the criteria, but that's just me. Heath, if you're just joining us and asking us what's wrong with the TAPS Act, go back and listen, man. I know that you really like to troll our page and tell us how awful of an organization we are, but I'm not going to delve into that again. I went off on a pretty long and epic rant earlier, so if you want to know, go back and listen, and you will learn everything that you ever wanted to know about why the TAPS Act is awful. Anyway, I think that has about done it for me. I am ready. I appreciate y'all bearing with me today. Today has been a great show. It has been one that has been filled with rants and some education. I hope y'all learned some things on it that y'all didn't know. Take this knowledge and share it with everybody that you can. And don't let these people get a pass. Until next Sunday, arm yourself with knowledge and share the ammo.